The moment I heard those words, a cold spear tore through my chest. She's easier to handle after the pills. My husband, speaking about me to our son like I was a burden, or worse, a nuisance. I stood frozen in our hallway, my hand clutching the doorframe as their voices drifted from the living room. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, and I'm 72 years old. I live in a small 2-bedroom apartment in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, where the sounds of the city never sleep and neither do my worries. Every morning, I wake up feeling like I'm carrying the weight of disappointment on my shoulders. The dull hum of the subway beneath my window mingles with the sour smell of overripe garbage on the street below. It all blends with this constant ache inside my chest, an ache I've carried for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. I shuffle to the kitchen in my worn slippers, the ones Daniel bought me 3 Christmases ago. They're falling apart now, much like everything else in my life. I make my weak coffee, just 1 sugar cube because the doctor says I need to watch my diabetes, and I glance at that old photo stuck to the fridge with a magnet from Atlantic City. There's Daniel as a toddler, his chubby hands reaching for a balloon. There's my husband Richard, his arm around my waist, both of us smiling like we had the whole world figured out. That picture feels like a bitter lie now. Yesterday was Daniel's 38th birthday. I waited by the phone for 2 hours, watching the minutes tick by on the old kitchen clock. Nothing. Not a call, not a text, not even one of those quick voice messages he sometimes sends when he's rushing between meetings. Meanwhile, Richard sat in his recliner across the living room, scrolling through his phone, completely ignoring the emptiness that fills this apartment like stale air. I kept replaying that conversation I'd overheard 3 days earlier. The words echoed in my mind, raw and jagged. She's easier to handle after the pills. Handle. Like I was some difficult animal that needed to be sedated into submission. My expectation had been simple: to be cared for, valued, treated like the woman who had spent 45 years building this family with her bare hands. Instead, I faced the deafening silence of neglect and the shocking betrayal that hung in our home like an invisible noose. But let me start from the beginning. Let me tell you how I got here. To this moment where I'm speaking to you instead of to the people who were supposed to love me most. I built this family piece by piece with aching hands and a hopeful heart. For decades, I sacrificed everything. My dreams of becoming a teacher, my savings account that I'd built working double shifts at the hospital cafeteria, my health that deteriorated while I took care of everyone else's needs. I gave it all away, thinking love meant endless giving. Mom, can you lend me $500 again? I'll pay you back next week, I promise. That's what Daniel said to me last spring, standing in this very kitchen, his eyes avoiding mine like they always did when money was involved. I gave it to him without a second thought because that's what mothers do, right? We give until there's nothing left to give. I remember the first time he asked for money. He was 25, fresh out of college with a business degree and dreams bigger than his bank account. Just until I get established, Mom. You know I'm good for it. I cleaned out my savings, $12,000 I'd been putting away for a rainy day. That rainy day never came for me, but Daniel's storms seemed endless. Over the years, the amounts grew larger and the promises grew emptier. $2,000 for a security deposit, $3,000 for a car repair, $5,000 for his wedding that I barely got invited to, just a small ceremony at City Hall where I sat in the back like a stranger. Richard's words cut deeper than Daniel's requests ever could. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Margaret. You never worked in the real world. Real world? As if raising his son, keeping his house, nursing him through 2 heart attacks and a nervous breakdown wasn't real enough. As if the years I spent working nights at the hospital while he built his small construction business weren't real contributions to our life together. The silence after these exchanges was deafening. It would settle over our apartment like fog, thick and suffocating. I began to wonder, was I only valuable as a wallet, a nurse, a shadow moving quietly through their lives, cleaning up their messes and asking for nothing in return? I started keeping track in a small notebook I hid in my dresser drawer. $18,000 to Daniel over 3 years, not including the groceries I bought for his family, the Christmas gifts for my grandchildren that came with cards signed Love, Daddy and Mommy. Never a mention of Grandma's contribution. Not including the nights I babysat while he and his wife went to expensive restaurants I could never afford. Forgiveness had always come easily to me. It was sewn into the fabric of who I thought I was supposed to be. Good wives forgive. Good mothers sacrifice. Good women don't ask for too much. But doubt. Doubt had started growing in my chest like a tumor, fed by every broken promise and every dismissive glance. The neglect wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, persistent, like water dripping on stone until it finally breaks through. Birthdays passed unnoticed, not just forgotten, but ignored. When I turned 70, I baked my own cake and sang happy birthday to myself in this empty kitchen, while Richard played poker with his friends, and Daniel was too busy with work to visit. My persistent cough went ignored for months. "It's just allergies," Richard would say whenever I mentioned feeling short of breath. When I finally collapsed in the grocery store and was rushed to Brooklyn Methodist Hospital, the doctor told me I had pneumonia. Severe pneumonia that had been building for weeks. I called Daniel from my hospital bed. "I can't make it today, Mom. Things are crazy at the office." Things were always crazy at the office when I needed him, but never too crazy to ask for money. The pills started after the hospital stay, little white tablets that Richard insisted were for my anxiety. "The doctor says you need to relax more, stop worrying about everything." But I never remembered talking to any doctor about anxiety. I remembered talking about my cough, my chest pains, my difficulty sleeping because I felt so alone. I didn't remember agreeing to medication that made me feel like I was floating outside my own life. At first, I thought the drowsiness was normal. Recovery, Richard called it. But weeks passed, then months, and I felt like I was living behind a thick piece of glass. Everything seemed muffled, distant. My thoughts moved through molasses. When I tried to discuss family finances or ask when Daniel might pay me back, I found myself unable to form the words properly. "See?" Richard would say to Daniel during their visits. Much calmer now. I started hiding the pills instead of taking them, tucking them under my tongue and spitting them out later. Slowly, the fog began to clear, and with it came a terrible clarity about what had been happening to me. That's when I overheard the conversation that changed everything. I had come back early from my weekly trip to the corner market. My arthritis was acting up, so I'd decided to skip the pharmacy and come straight home. I heard voices in the living room, Richard and Daniel, talking in the hushed tones people use when they're discussing problems. "She's been asking about the money again," Daniel was saying, "getting pushy about it. Don't worry about it." Richard's voice was casual, dismissive. "She's easier to handle after the pills. Give it a few more days and she'll forget all about it. She usually does." I stood in that hallway, my grocery bag cutting into my palms, and felt something break inside my chest. Not my heart. That had been breaking slowly for years. This was something deeper. My trust. My belief in the fundamental goodness of the people I loved most. They weren't just taking my money. They were taking my mind. That night I sat at my kitchen table with my hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea, staring at the wall where I'd hung Daniel's first-grade drawing of our family. 3 stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun. My family, written in crayon across the bottom. Where was that little boy who used to crawl into my lap when thunderstorms scared him? When had he learned to see his mother as something to manage instead of someone to love? I picked up my phone and did something I'd never done before. I opened the voice recording app Daniel had shown me months earlier. He'd said it might help me remember things better when the pills made me foggy. Instead of recording reminders for myself, I carried it with me, waiting. It didn't take long. 2 days later, they were at it again. Richard was explaining to Daniel how to handle me when I got difficult. But this time, I was ready. The key is consistency, Richard was saying. Same time every day, crushed up in her morning coffee if she starts refusing to take them willingly. Her sister went through the same thing. Family said medication was the only way to keep her manageable. My sister? Ruth had died 5 years ago from complications related to her diabetes, but she'd spent her last months in a haze of confusion that her family attributed to her illness. Had they been medicating her too? What if she figures it out? Daniel asked. She won't, and even if she does, who's going to believe her? She's a 72-year-old woman with a history of anxiety and depression. We're her loving family, taking care of her medical needs. I stood outside that living room door, my phone recording every word, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not sadness, not hurt. Anger. Pure, clean anger that burned away the fog and the doubt and the endless excuses I'd been making for them. They had turned me into a ghost in my own life. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, listening to that recording over and over, memorizing every cold word. By morning, I knew what I had to do. Have you ever reached a moment where you realized that the people you'd die for wouldn't even live for you? Where you understood that your love had become a weapon they used against you? I made copies of that recording. I researched elder abuse hotlines. I called legal aid and made an appointment. For the first time in years, I had a plan that didn't involve sacrificing myself for someone else's comfort. But first, I had to confront them. Daniel came for his usual Sunday dinner the following week. He brought his wife Sarah, a thin woman with sharp eyes who'd never liked me much, though she never turned down the meals I cooked or the money I provided. Their children, my beloved grandchildren, stayed home. Too much homework, Sarah explained, though I suspected they were being kept away for other reasons. We sat around my small dining table, the one Richard and I had bought when we were first married and still believed in forever. I served pot roast, Daniel's favorite, and watched him eat while making small talk about his job, the weather, anything but the elephant sitting heavy in the room. "Mom," Daniel said finally, wiping his mouth with the napkin I'd ironed that morning. "Dad and I have been talking. We think it might be time to consider your options." Options? I kept my voice steady, though my hands were trembling under the table. "Assisted living," Sarah chimed in, her voice bright with false concern. "Somewhere you'd have people to take care of you. You wouldn't have to worry about cooking or cleaning or managing your finances." "I manage just fine," I said. Richard leaned forward, putting on his most reasonable voice. "Margaret, you've been having episodes. Forgetting things. Getting confused about money. Last week you accused Daniel of not paying you back, but you couldn't remember what you'd supposedly lent him." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced. How long had they been rehearsing this conversation? "I remember everything," I said quietly. "Every dollar, every broken promise, every lie." The table went silent. I could hear the tick of the old clock on the wall, the distant sound of sirens on the street below. Normal life continuing while mine fell apart. "Mom," Daniel's voice took on that patronizing tone he used when he thought I was being unreasonable. "You're not well. The medication isn't working the way it should. Maybe we need to talk to your doctor about adjusting." "I know about the pills." The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. I watched the color drain from Daniel's face, saw Richard's jaw tighten in that way it did when he was cornered. "I don't know what you think you know," Richard began, but I held up my hand. "I knew about the recording, Richard. Every word. Every cruel, calculating word." I pulled my phone from my pocket and set it on the table. "Would you like to hear it?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Sarah's fork clattered against her plate as she set it down with shaking hands. "You recorded us?" Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. "You drugged me," I replied. "For months, without my knowledge, without my consent, making me doubt my own mind while you stole my money and planned to steal my freedom." Richard stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. "Now you listen here. No." The word came out stronger than I'd spoken in years. "You listen, both of you. I built this family with my sweat and my sacrifice and my unconditional love. I gave you everything I had, and you turned me into your victim." I stood up too, my hands steady now, my voice clear. "I will not be medicated into submission. I will not be managed like a problem to be solved. I will not buy love that has to be purchased with my dignity." I walked to the living room and picked up that old photo from the end table. The one from Daniel's 5th birthday party, all of us laughing over chocolate cake. I looked at it for a long moment, remembering the woman I used to be, the dreams I used to have for this family. Then I tore it in half. "Respect me or lose me," I said, my voice echoing in the sudden quiet. "Those are your only options now." Daniel was crying, actual tears running down his face like he was 5 years old again and had broken his favorite toy. "Mom, please, we can fix this. We just wanted what was best for you." "What was best for you, you mean?" "My money when you needed it. My silence when it became inconvenient. My confusion when I started asking the wrong questions." Sarah tried to speak, but I wasn't finished. "I changed the locks yesterday. I closed the joint accounts. I moved my money to a bank where only I have access. The lawyer has copies of everything, the recordings, the medical records showing medication I never consented to, the financial records showing $18,000 in loans that were never repaid." It felt like lifting a weight I'd been carrying for so long. I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. Richard's face was red with fury. "You can't do this. We're your family. You need us." "No," I said quietly. "You needed me. My money, my services, my compliance. But you never needed me, the real me, the woman who had opinions and boundaries and the right to be treated with basic human dignity." I walked to the door and opened it. "I think you should leave now." They gathered their things in stunned silence. At the threshold, Daniel turned back, his eyes desperate. "What about the grandkids, Mom? You won't be able to see them if..." "If what?" "If I demand to be treated like a human being instead of an ATM with a pulse." I shook my head. "If you use my grandchildren as weapons against me, then you'll just be proving everything I've said about who you really are." After they left, I sat in my quiet apartment and cried. Not from sadness, but from relief. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. But the story doesn't end there. 3 weeks later, I was settling into my new routine. Morning coffee without hidden pills, afternoon walks in Prospect Park, evening phone calls with Ruth's daughter who'd called to check on me after hearing about my situation through the family grapevine. I was finally sleeping through the night for the first time in months. That's when Mrs. Rivera from down the hall knocked on my door with a worried expression on her weathered face. "Margaret, honey," she said in her soft Dominican accent, "I need to tell you something. My niece works at the bank where your daughter-in-law goes. She heard something today that you need to know." My blood went cold. Sarah at the bank. She had no reason to be at my bank unless... "They tried to withdraw money from your account yesterday," Mrs. Rivera continued. "They had some kind of paperwork, said you'd signed it giving them power of attorney due to your mental condition. The bank turned them away because you'd already been there warning them about possible fraud attempts, but they made a scene. Sarah was bragging to the teller about how easy it had been to forge your signature in the past. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. It was one thing to discover they'd been medicating me without consent. It was another to learn they'd been forging my signature, stealing from me systematically while making me believe I was losing my memory. How many times had they done this? How much money had they taken over the years while convincing me I'd simply forgotten lending it to them? I thanked Mrs. Rivera and closed the door with shaking hands. But this time, the shaking wasn't from fear or heartbreak. It was from rage. They had pushed too far. The next morning, I walked into the police station on Eastern Parkway and filed a formal complaint for elder abuse and fraud. I presented the recordings, the medical records, the bank statements, everything I'd spent weeks organizing with my lawyer's help. The detective who took my statement was a kind woman about Daniel's age. She listened without judgment as I explained how my own family had systematically isolated, medicated, and robbed me. "This is more common than you'd think," she told me gently. "Family members often feel entitled to their elderly relatives' resources. They convince themselves they're doing the right thing, looking out for your best interests. Even when they're destroying the person they claim to be protecting? Especially then. It's easier to manage a victim than to respect an equal." A week later, Daniel called. His voice was different, smaller, frightened. "Mom, the police came to my office. They're asking questions about financial impropriety and elder abuse. This is crazy. We're family. Families don't do this to each other." "You're right," I said calmly. "Families don't drug each other without consent. They don't forge signatures. They don't steal money and then gaslight their victims into believing they're losing their minds. But you did all of those things to me. We made mistakes. You committed crimes, Daniel, against the woman who gave you life, who sacrificed her dreams to fund yours, who loved you unconditionally even when you proved you didn't deserve it." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. "What do you want?" he finally whispered. "I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to know that I will never again allow anyone to make me doubt my own reality. And I want you to leave me alone unless you're prepared to treat me with the respect I should have demanded years ago." I hung up feeling oddly empty, not satisfied with revenge, just finished. Done with a chapter of my life that had gone on far too long. The legal process moved slowly, as these things do. But I had time now. Time I'd never had before because I wasn't constantly managing other people's crises or questioning my own perceptions. I used that time to rebuild myself. I started taking watercolor classes at the community center in Park Slope. My hands, which had spent decades serving others, learned to create beauty for no reason other than my own joy. I painted the view from my window, the tree that bloomed every spring outside my bedroom, the way morning light hit the brick building across the street. Simple scenes that had been invisible to me when I was drowning in everyone else's needs. I reconnected with old friends, women from my hospital days who'd retired years ago. We met for coffee in cafes I'd never had time to explore, sharing stories of grandchildren who actually visited, of husbands who'd learned to do their own laundry, of children who called because they wanted to, not because they needed something. "I always wondered what happened to you," my friend Elena told me over lunch in a little Caribbean place on Flatbush Avenue. "You just disappeared from our group." "I got lost," I admitted. "I forgot that I was a person separate from what I could provide for other people." She nodded like she understood completely. "My mother used to say that some people mistake your kindness for weakness. They think being good means being stupid. But staying stupid, now that's a choice." Mrs. Rivera became a real friend, not just a neighbor. We started taking evening walks together, her telling me stories about her family in the Dominican Republic, me sharing my slow journey back to myself. She had survived an abusive marriage, raised 4 children alone, and still managed to find joy in small things. The perfect avocado at the market, her granddaughter's phone calls from college, the way sunset painted our building gold every evening. "You're different now," she observed one evening as we sat on the front steps watching the neighborhood kids play in the street. "Stronger, like you remember who you are." "I'm learning," I told her. "It takes time to undo decades of forgetting yourself. The divorce papers were finalized on a Tuesday in October. Richard contested it initially, claiming I was mentally incompetent to make such decisions. But the medical evaluation ordered by the court found me perfectly sound. More clear-headed than I'd been in years, actually, once the unauthorized medication was out of my system. He tried one last manipulation, calling me sobbing about how I was destroying our family, how 45 years of marriage meant something. It did mean something, I told him. It meant I spent the best years of my life building something beautiful, and you spent the last years of my life tearing it down. I'm choosing to remember the beauty and protect myself from the destruction. On my 73rd birthday, I threw myself a party. Not a big celebration, just a small gathering in my apartment. Mrs. Rivera, my painting classmates, Elena, and 2 other friends from my hospital days. We ate cake from a good bakery instead of something I'd baked myself. We drank wine from glasses I'd bought just because I liked them, not because they matched anything else. My phone sat silent all day. No calls from Daniel. No texts from my grandchildren. No acknowledgement that I existed from the people who'd once demanded my constant attention. A year ago, that silence would have broken my heart. Now it felt like freedom. "You're glowing," Elena observed as we cleaned up the cake plates. "I mean, actually glowing, like you're lit up from inside." I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror that night and saw what she meant. My face was still lined with age, my hair still gray, my hands still marked by years of work. But my eyes were clear, alert, unafraid. I looked like a woman who was finally awake after a long, troubled sleep. The legal case concluded 6 months later. Daniel pled to a reduced charge, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. He had to pay restitution, not just the money he'd taken, but damages for the emotional harm. Richard faced charges related to medicating me without consent, though his lawyer managed to get him probation and mandatory counseling. I didn't feel vindicated by their punishment. I felt sad for what we'd all lost, the family we could have been if greed and control hadn't poisoned everything. But I also felt proud of the woman I'd become, the one who'd found the courage to save herself when no one else would. The most beautiful surprise came 8 months after that terrible confrontation. A knock on my door one Saturday morning revealed my youngest granddaughter, Amy, Daniel's 16-year-old daughter. She was tall now, almost as tall as me, with her grandfather's eyes but something softer in her expression. "Grandma?" Her voice was tentative, uncertain. "I've been wanting to see you," Dad said. "Well, Dad said a lot of things, but I needed to hear your side." I invited her in and made hot chocolate the way I used to when she was little, with extra marshmallows and a dash of cinnamon. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd made the decision to record that conversation, where I'd planned my escape from a life that was killing me slowly. "Dad says you're sick," she told me, her young face serious with the weight of adult problems. "That you accused him and Grandpa of things that weren't true because you're confused." "What do you think?" I asked her. She was quiet for a long moment, studying my face like she was looking for signs of the madness her father had described. "You seem more like yourself than you have in years," she said finally. "More. Present. Like you're actually here instead of somewhere else." We talked for 3 hours. I didn't badmouth her father or try to turn her against him. I just told her the truth. About the pills, about the money, about the recording, about learning that love doesn't mean accepting abuse. I showed her my paintings, my small apartment that finally felt like home, the photo albums I'd put together of my new life. When she got up to leave, she hugged me tight. "I'm sorry they did that to you, Grandma, and I'm sorry I didn't visit sooner. Dad said you didn't want to see us anymore." "I always want to see you," I told her, "but I can't let anyone use you as a tool to manipulate me. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be because you want one too, not because someone's making you choose sides." She started visiting every other Saturday. Sometimes she brought her older brother, who was more cautious but eventually warmed up to the idea that maybe his grandmother wasn't the villain in this story. They never spoke about their father during these visits, and I never asked. It was enough to watch them rediscover the woman they'd known when they were small, before family dysfunction had taught them that love was conditional and complicated. 2 years have passed now since that moment when I heard those words that changed everything. I live alone in my small Brooklyn apartment, but I'm not lonely. There's a difference. A crucial difference I never understood when I was surrounded by people who needed me for everything, except who I actually was. I wake up each morning and make my coffee. Real coffee, strong and black. No hidden medication to cloud my thoughts. I look out my window at the tree that's blooming again, at the busy street below where people are rushing to jobs and appointments, and all the urgent business of living. Sometimes I see Mrs. Rivera walking her tiny dog, and we wave to each other like old friends do. My bank account is smaller now. Legal fees and starting over cost money. But every dollar in it is mine, earned by me or saved by me, not borrowed against my guilt or my love or my desperate need to be needed. I budget carefully, but I also buy myself flowers sometimes, and books I want to read, and art supplies that serve no purpose except my own joy. I've learned to paint portraits now, not just landscapes. I painted one of myself, not as I was during those dark years when I was vanishing a little more each day, but as I am now. Strong hands holding a brush instead of cleaning up someone else's mess. Clear eyes looking directly at the viewer instead of anxiously watching for signs of displeasure. A slight smile that comes from contentment rather than the desperate hope that maybe today I'll be appreciated. The painting hangs in my living room where that family photo used to be. Visitors sometimes ask about it. Is it me? Did I really paint it myself? When I tell them yes, they're always surprised. You're so talented, they say. Have you been painting long? All my life, I answer now. I just took a few decades off to be someone else. Last month, Daniel called. Not asking for money this time, just calling. His voice was different. Older, more tired. He'd been going to therapy, he said. Court-ordered at first, but continuing voluntarily because he was starting to understand some things about himself he didn't like. I was wrong, he said simply. About everything. The way I treated you. The things I took from you. The person I became when money was involved. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. It was the apology I'd waited for, dreamed of, rehearsed my response to in my head for months. Now that it had finally come, I felt strangely empty. Not angry, not vindicated, just tired. I appreciate that, I told him. Is there any chance? He began. But I interrupted gently. I need time, Daniel. You stole years from me. Years when I was drugged and confused and doubting my own reality. I'm not ready to pretend that an apology erases that. I understand, he said, and for the first time in decades, I believed he might actually mean it. Richard sends cards on holidays now, generic ones with no personal messages, just his signature. I don't send them back, but I don't respond either. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. Some trust, once broken, can't be repaired. That's okay. Not every story has to end with forgiveness. Sometimes it's enough to end with freedom. Amy graduated from high school last spring. She invited me to the ceremony, and I sat in the audience watching her accept her diploma with tears in my eyes. Not sad tears, proud ones. Proud of her for maintaining our relationship despite family pressure. Proud of myself for being there, present and clear-headed, and genuinely celebrating her achievement instead of worrying about who might be upset that I was invited. After the ceremony, she introduced me to her friends as my grandmother, the artist. Not my grandmother who used to take care of everyone, or my grandmother who loans money, or any of the other roles I'd played for so long. Just the artist. The woman who creates beautiful things because creation makes her happy. I'm writing this story down because Amy asked me to. She's applying to colleges now. And she wants to write her essay about resilience, about watching someone she loves rediscover their strength after losing it. She asked if I minded her using my story as inspiration. "Are you proud of what you did?" she asked me. "Taking them to court, divorcing Grandpa, starting over at your age?" I thought about it for a long time before answering. "I'm proud that I finally valued myself enough to save my own life," I told her. "I'm proud that I chose truth over peace, dignity over being comfortable. I'm proud that I taught you that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, even against people you love." She smiled at that, a smile that reminded me of myself at her age, full of possibility and strength. "I used to think love meant never saying no," she said. "But watching you, I learned that sometimes love means setting boundaries that protect your ability to keep loving." Wise words from a young woman who won't make the same mistakes I did, who won't spend decades confusing kindness with weakness, generosity with self-destruction, loyalty with accepting abuse. As I sit here now, writing these words on a Saturday morning, while jazz music plays softly in the background and sunlight streams through windows I've finally had time to wash properly, I think about the woman I was 3 years ago, shuffling through her days in a medicated haze, constantly anxious about everyone else's needs, slowly disappearing into a role that was devouring her alive. She feels like a stranger to me now, someone I knew once but outgrew, like childhood clothes that no longer fit. I don't hate the people who turned me into her. Hate is a poison that hurts the one carrying it more than its intended target. But I don't miss them either. I don't miss the constant worry about Daniel's finances or Richard's moods. I don't miss walking on eggshells in my own home, measuring every word to avoid conflict, sacrificing my own needs to keep everyone else happy. I especially don't miss the pills, those little white tablets that were supposed to make me easier to handle. Do you know what's actually easy to handle? A woman who knows her own worth and isn't afraid to defend it. A woman who says what she means and means what she says. A woman who has learned that being alone is not the same as being abandoned, and that silence can be peaceful instead of painful. Some evenings, I sit on my fire escape and watch the neighborhood come alive around me. Children playing in the street, their laughter drifting up to my window. Couples walking hand in hand, heading to dinner or the movies or wherever couples go when they actually enjoy each other's company. Elderly men playing dominoes on the sidewalk, arguing good-naturedly about politics and sports. Life is happening all around me, and for the first time in years, I feel like I'm part of it instead of watching from behind glass. I'm not invisible anymore. I'm not a problem to be managed or a resource to be exploited. I'm just Margaret, a woman who paints watercolors and makes friends with her neighbors and calls her granddaughter every Wednesday to check in about her college applications. It's a smaller life than the one I had before, measured in people reached and money distributed and crises managed. But it's entirely mine. Every decision I make is mine. Every dollar I spend is mine. Every moment of peace I experience belongs to me alone. That's worth everything I lost to get here. If you've stayed with me through this long story, if any part of it sounds familiar, if you've ever been told you're too sensitive when you protest being mistreated, if you've ever been medicated into compliance, if you've ever had your generosity turned into a weapon against you, I want you to know something important. You are not crazy. You are not too much. You are not responsible for managing other people's emotions at the expense of your own well-being. Love does not require you to accept abuse. Family does not give anyone the right to exploit you. Age does not make you less deserving of respect and dignity. You have the right to clear thinking, to financial security, to say no without justification. You have the right to be valued for who you are, not what you provide. You have the right to protect yourself, even from people you love. It's never too late to save your own life. It's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to discover who you are when you're not busy being what everyone else needs you to be. I learned that at 72. But you don't have to wait that long. Have you lived through something similar? Have you watched someone you care about disappear into the role of family caretaker, ATM, or emotional dumping ground? Have you ever felt guilty for wanting to be treated with basic human dignity by the people who claim to love you? Your story matters. Your experience is valid. Your need for respect and boundaries is not selfish, it's essential. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that you deserve better, if it gave you even a moment of hope that change is possible, please like this video and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone. Together, we can hold each other's hands through the darkness and into the light. You are worth fighting for. You are worth saving. Even if the person you need to be saved from is someone you love. Even if you have to do the saving yourself, especially then. 3 years have passed since that confrontation, and I want to share something else with you. Something that proves healing isn't just about surviving the trauma, but about thriving despite it. Last Tuesday, I received an envelope in the mail that would have terrified the old Margaret. It was from a law firm, not mine, but one representing my ex-daughter-in-law, Sarah. She was asking for visitation rights with me. Not for herself, but for her children, my grandchildren. Apparently, Amy had told her mother about our Saturday visits, and the youngest one, little Marcus, had been asking where Grandma Margaret went. Sarah's letter, written through her attorney, was careful and formal, but between the legal language, I could sense genuine remorse. The woman I used to be would have immediately called Daniel, would have worried about what this meant, would have let fear make the decision for me. Instead, I sat with the letter for 3 days, thinking about what I wanted, not what anyone else needed, but what would serve my own peace and happiness. I called the lawyer and arranged to meet Sarah at a neutral location, the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, where the cherry blossoms were just beginning to bloom. She looked different than I remembered, smaller somehow, as if the weight of consequences had worn her down. Her sharp edges seemed softer, her eyes less calculating. "I want to apologize," she said before we even found a bench to sit on. "For all of it, for going along with the medication scheme, for the financial manipulation, for keeping the children away from you when all you ever did was love them." I watched her carefully, looking for signs of manipulation, but saw only exhaustion and genuine regret. "I was scared," she continued. "Daniel was so convinced that you were becoming a burden, that you might become senile and create problems for us financially. I let him convince me that we were protecting our family, but I know now we were protecting ourselves at your expense." We walked slowly through the garden, past families with strollers and young couples taking photos. Normal people living normal lives, untainted by the poison of greed and control that had destroyed my family. "The children miss you," Sarah said quietly. "Marcus still asks if you're mad at him. Amy tells me about your painting lessons and how proud you are of her college applications. I want them to know their grandmother, the real one, not the confused woman we tried to turn you into." I stopped walking and looked at her directly. "Are you asking for my forgiveness, Sarah?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I'm asking for a chance to prove that people can change. That mistakes, even terrible ones, don't have to define us forever." That evening, I called Amy and asked her what she thought about her mother's request. There was silence on the other end of the phone, then a sigh that sounded older than her 18 years. "I think Mom is genuinely sorry," she said finally. "But I also think she's scared. The divorce hit Dad hard financially. He had to pay you back all that money, and then the legal fees. Mom's been working 2 jobs, and Marcus keeps asking about you. She needs help, but this time she's asking instead of just taking." "And what do you think I should do?" "I think you should do whatever makes you happy, Grandma. You've earned the right to be selfish." Selfish? What a word to use about a woman who'd spent 70 years putting everyone else's needs first. But Amy was right. I had earned that right. I invited Sarah to bring Marcus and his older sister Jessica for a visit. Not to my apartment. That space was still too precious. Too much mind to share with people who'd contributed to my pain. Instead, we met at the community center where I took my art classes. I'd arranged to have my instructor, Mrs. Chen, there to help the children try watercolors while Sarah and I talked. Marcus was 7 now, with Daniel's stubborn cowlick and my mother's wide eyes. He ran to me without hesitation, wrapping his small arms around my waist like no time had passed at all. "Grandma Margaret, Mommy said you were sick, but you look really good." His innocent honesty broke something open in my chest. Jessica, 12 and cautious like her mother used to be, hung back until she saw Marcus's enthusiastic reception. Then she shyly approached and accepted my hug, though she kept glancing at her mother as if seeking permission. We spent 2 hours at that community center. I watched my grandchildren paint clumsy but enthusiastic flowers and houses, while Sarah told me about her life, the struggles with money, the guilt about what they'd done to me, the way Daniel had retreated into himself after the court case. "He's getting help," she said. "Real therapy, not just what the court required. He talks about you sometimes, about how he wishes he could undo what he did. And what about you, Sarah? What do you wish?" She looked up from the watercolor she'd been half-heartedly dabbing at. "I wish I'd had the courage to stand up to him when I knew what we were doing was wrong. I wish I'd valued you for who you were instead of seeing you as an asset to be managed." When it was time to leave, Marcus asked if he could come back next week. "I want to learn to paint like you, Grandma. Mrs. Chen says you're really good." I looked at Sarah, who was watching her son with tears in her eyes. "We'll see," I told him, "but maybe we can arrange something." That night, I called Mrs. Rivera and told her about the visit. She listened without judgment, as she always did, then offered the wisdom that had guided her through her own difficult family situations. "Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting," she said. "And giving someone another chance doesn't mean you have to give them the same chance they had before. You can love those children without letting their parents hurt you again." Over the next month, I established a routine with my grandchildren that felt safe for me. Saturday afternoon art classes at the community center, where Sarah would drop them off and pick them up. No visits to my apartment, no private family dinners, no opportunities to slide back into old patterns of manipulation and control. The children thrived in this environment. Marcus discovered he had a talent for painting animals, wild, colorful creatures that seemed to leap off the paper with primal joy. Jessica was more careful, more precise, creating detailed botanical illustrations that reminded me of the scientific drawings in old textbooks. "You're different with them," Mrs. Chen observed one afternoon after the children had left with their mother, more relaxed than with most grandparents who come here. "I don't feel responsible for their happiness anymore," I realized as I said it. "I love them, but I'm not carrying the weight of their entire emotional well-being on my shoulders." It was true. The old Margaret would have worried constantly. Were they eating enough? Were they doing well in school? Were their parents treating them properly? Did they have warm enough coats for winter? The new Margaret loved them fully, but from a healthy distance, offering what I could give freely without depleting myself. One Saturday, Marcus asked a question that stopped me cold. "Grandma, why did Daddy say you were sick when you weren't really sick?" Sarah went white, but I had learned not to cover for other people's lies anymore. "Sometimes, Marcus, grown-ups make mistakes. Big mistakes. Your daddy thought it would be easier if I was confused and couldn't ask questions about things that were important to me." "Like what kind of questions?" "Like questions about my money and how I wanted to live my life? And whether I wanted to take medicine that made me sleepy all the time." He considered this with the seriousness that children bring to important revelations. "That doesn't seem very nice," he said finally. "No," I agreed. "It wasn't very nice. But sometimes people do not nice things when they're scared or worried about money, or when they forget that other people have feelings too." Jessica looked up from her drawing. "Is that why you don't live with Grandpa anymore?" "That's part of it, sweetheart. Sometimes when people hurt each other badly enough, they can't live together anymore, even if they used to love each other very much. The questions didn't upset me the way they might have a year earlier. I was no longer afraid of the truth or worried about protecting everyone else from the consequences of their actions. The children deserved honest answers, age-appropriate but real, about why their family had fractured. Sarah, to her credit, didn't try to shut down these conversations or redirect the children's natural curiosity. She sat quietly, sometimes wiping away tears, but letting me handle their questions in my own way. After one particularly revealing session, she asked if we could talk privately. "I want you to know," she said as we watched the children play in the community center's small garden, "that I'm not trying to manipulate you into letting us back into your life fully. I know we don't deserve that. I just want my children to know their grandmother before it's too late." Too late for what? Too late for them to learn what real strength looks like. Too late for them to understand that love doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. Too late for me to show them that it's possible to admit when you're wrong and try to make amends, even when you can't undo the damage. It was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. "Sarah," I said carefully, "I want you to understand something. I will never trust you the way I used to. I will never be vulnerable with you again. But that doesn't mean we can't find a way forward that serves the children's happiness and respects my boundaries." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand, and I'm grateful for even this much." The autumn of my 74th year brought unexpected developments. Daniel asked to see me, not through Sarah or the children, but directly, in a carefully worded letter that acknowledged the pain he'd caused and asked for nothing more than the chance to apologize in person. I almost said no. The wounds he'd inflicted cut the deepest because they came from the child I'd loved most unconditionally, the one I'd sacrificed the most for. But curiosity won over caution. I agreed to meet him at the same neutral location where I'd met Sarah, the botanical garden, this time when the leaves were turning gold and red. He looked older than his 40 years, gray threading through his hair, lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and heavy regrets. When he saw me walking down the path toward our designated meeting spot, his face crumpled like a child's, and for a moment I saw the little boy who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking on the word. "I don't even know where to start." "Start with the truth," I told him, settling onto the bench beside him but maintaining careful distance. "All of it." He told me about the gambling problem he'd hidden for years, the real reason he'd needed so much money, the debts I'd unknowingly helped him pay. He told me about the financial pressure that had made my savings account look like a solution to all his problems. He told me about the day Richard suggested the pills, how wrong it had felt even as he'd gone along with it. "I told myself we were protecting you from stress," he said, his hands shaking as he spoke, "from the worry of knowing how bad things really were. But the truth is, we were protecting ourselves. From having to face what we'd become, from having to find real solutions, from having to treat you like an adult who deserved to make her own choices." He talked for almost an hour, emptying out years of lies and justifications and buried shame. I listened without interrupting, watching his face for signs of the manipulation I'd learned to recognize, but seeing only genuine anguish. "The worst part," he said finally, "is that I learned how to see you as a problem instead of a person. How to think of you as someone who couldn't handle the truth instead of someone who deserved to know it. How to convince myself that controlling you was the same as caring for you." "And what do you see now?" I asked. "I see a woman who was stronger than all of us combined," he said without hesitation. "Strong enough to survive what we did to her, strong enough to save herself when no one else would, strong enough to rebuild her life at an age when most people think their stories are already written." We sat in silence for a while, watching other families walk by. Normal families where grandmothers pushed strollers and adult children called just to chat, where love wasn't complicated by greed or control or the need to manage inconvenient truths. "What do you want from me, Daniel?" I asked finally. "Nothing," he said, and for the first time in our conversation, I believed him completely. "I don't want your money. I've been clean from gambling for 18 months and I'm paying my own bills now. I don't want you to forgive me. I know some things can't be forgiven. I don't even want a relationship with you, not if it causes you stress or makes you doubt yourself again." "Then why are we here?" "Because I need you to know that you were right. About everything. About the pills. About the money. About us using your love against you. I need you to know that what happened to you wasn't your fault. Wasn't because you were confused or difficult or too sensitive. It was because we failed you in the most fundamental ways." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "This is the deed to the house, the one Dad and I bought with your money years ago, the one we convinced you was just a loan. It's yours now, free and clear. You can sell it, live in it, burn it down, whatever would make you happiest." I took the envelope with trembling hands. The house in Queens, a modest 2-bedroom that they'd bought as an investment property, was now worth nearly 3 times what they'd borrowed from me to purchase it. "Daniel, it was never ours," he said firmly. "We used your money and your trust to buy it, then lied about paying you back. It belongs to you. It always did." I stared at the envelope, thinking about the years I'd struggled to pay my rent while they'd collected income from a property purchased with my savings. "This doesn't erase anything," I told him. "I know, but it's a start. It's acknowledgement that you were never confused, never wrong, never too much trouble. You were a woman who deserved better than what we gave you." That evening, I called my lawyer to verify the legality of the deed transfer. The house was indeed mine now, no strings attached, no hidden conditions. The rental income alone would double my monthly budget and allow me to live with the dignity I'd been denied for so long. But more than the financial security, the gesture represented something I'd thought was impossible: accountability. Not just apology, but concrete action to undo the harm that had been done. Mrs. Rivera was ecstatic when I told her about the house. "You could move somewhere nicer now," she said. "Somewhere with an elevator and a doorman and a view of the park." But I looked around my small apartment, the one I'd fought so hard to keep, where I'd learned to be alone without being lonely, where I'd painted my first watercolor and made my first decision based purely on my own desires, and realized I didn't want to leave. "This is home," I told her, "the first place that's ever been entirely mine." Instead of moving, I used some of the rental income to make improvements. I had the kitchen renovated, installed better lighting in the living room where I painted, bought furniture that served my comfort rather than everyone else's approval. I even splurged on a small balcony garden, filling it with herbs and flowers that bloomed for no one's pleasure but my own. The most meaningful change wasn't physical, though. It was the way I finally stopped waiting. Stopped waiting for phone calls that might not come. Stopped waiting for apologies that might not be sincere. Stopped waiting for other people to give me permission to be happy. I started saying yes to invitations I would have once declined out of guilt or obligation. Yes to weekend trips with Elena to visit museums in Philadelphia. Yes to Mrs. Rivera's granddaughter's wedding, where I danced until my feet hurt and laughed until my cheeks ached. Yes to a community theater production where I painted sets and discovered I had a talent for creating convincing fake brick walls and dreamy forest scenes. Amy started her freshman year at Brooklyn College, studying social work with a focus on elder advocacy. She said our experience had inspired her career choice. She wanted to help other older adults who might be facing what I'd gone through. "You should speak to my class," she suggested one day over coffee. "Tell your story to future social workers. Help them understand what financial abuse actually looks like from the inside." The idea terrified me. Standing in front of a room full of young people, exposing the most painful parts of my story, admitting how long I'd allowed myself to be victimized. It felt too vulnerable, too raw. But Amy's professor was interested, and eventually, I agreed to give it a try. The day of my first speaking engagement, I arrived at the college campus with sweaty palms and a racing heart. The classroom was filled with bright-faced students, most of them younger than my grandchildren, all of them looking at me with expressions of polite interest. I started slowly, telling them about the pills, about the financial manipulation, about learning to doubt my own reality. But as I spoke, I watched their faces change. Interest became concern, then anger, then determination. "How common is this?" one student asked. "More common than you'd think," I answered, echoing what the detective had told me years earlier. Family members often feel entitled to their elderly relatives' resources, and the victims often don't report it because they're ashamed or afraid, or because they still love the people who are hurting them. "What would have helped you the most?" another student asked. I thought about that question for a long moment. Someone who believed me when I said something was wrong. Someone who helped me trust my own perceptions instead of questioning them. Someone who treated me like an adult who deserved respect, not like a problem to be solved. After the presentation, several students approached me with their own stories. Grandparents who'd been isolated by family members, elderly neighbors who seemed confused but might have been over-medicated, relatives who'd gradually lost control of their finances under suspicious circumstances. "You've opened their eyes," Amy told me proudly as we walked across campus afterward. "You've helped them understand that elder abuse isn't always obvious, isn't always strangers taking advantage of vulnerable people. Sometimes it's families who convince themselves they're doing the right thing." That first speaking engagement led to others: senior centers, nursing homes, community colleges, anywhere people were willing to listen to an old woman tell her story of survival and recovery. Each time got easier, and each time I felt a little more purpose in the pain I'd endured. One evening, as I was preparing for a speaking engagement at a community center in Queens, Mrs. Rivera knocked on my door with an expression I'd never seen before: excitement mixed with worry. "Margaret, you need to see this," she said, holding up her tablet. "My niece sent me a link to an article about you." It was a piece in the local section of the Brooklyn paper titled, "Grandmother's Courage Inspires Elder Rights Advocacy." The reporter had attended one of my presentations and written about my story, my legal case, and my new role speaking about elder abuse. But what made Mrs. Rivera worried, and what made my blood run cold, was the quote at the end of the article from Daniel. "My mother is an inspiration," he'd told the reporter. "She taught our whole family about the importance of standing up for yourself and demanding respect. We're proud of the work she's doing now to help other seniors." The manipulation was subtle, but unmistakable. He was trying to rewrite the narrative, to make himself and Richard look like proud supporters of my advocacy work, rather than the perpetrators of the abuse I was working to prevent. "He's using your success to rehabilitate his own image," Mrs. Rivera said grimly. "Making himself look good by claiming credit for your strength." I stared at the article, feeling that familiar surge of rage I thought I'd left behind. But this time, the anger was different, cleaner, more focused. I wasn't angry at myself for being foolish enough to trust him. I was angry at his continued attempts to manipulate the truth. The next morning, I called the reporter who'd written the article. "I'd like to clarify something," I told her. "The quote from my son is misleading. He didn't teach me to stand up for myself. He was one of the people I had to learn to stand up to. He wasn't proud of my work. He was one of the reasons the work became necessary." The reporter was interested in hearing more, and I found myself giving my first media interview, speaking clearly and calmly about the specific details of what Daniel and Richard had done to me. The follow-up article was more pointed, more honest, and it included Daniel's full quote alongside my response to it. "Elder abuse survivor Margaret Santana wants to make one thing clear. The family members who inspired her advocacy work were not her supporters, but her abusers. Daniel called me after that second article was published, his voice tight with anger. "You're embarrassing our whole family," he said. "Marcus's friends' parents read that article. They're asking questions about what kind of people we are." "What kind of people are you, Daniel?" I asked calmly. "We're people who made mistakes and learned from them. We're people who are trying to move forward and be better. And I'm a person who refuses to let those mistakes be minimized or forgotten," I replied. "I'm a person who won't allow her story to be rewritten to make her abusers more comfortable." "So this is it? You're going to punish us forever? Never let us make amends." "Making amends doesn't mean I have to protect you from the consequences of your actions," I said. "It doesn't mean I have to help you manage your reputation or make your lives easier. You want to move forward? Move forward. But don't expect me to carry you while you do it." I hung up feeling lighter than I had in months. The conversation clarified something I'd been struggling with since Daniel's apology in the garden. Forgiveness, I realized, didn't require me to make his life easier. Healing didn't mean pretending the damage hadn't been done. That winter, I received an unexpected phone call from a woman named Carol, whose voice was shaky with tears. "I heard you speak at the Sunset Park Senior Center," she said. "About the pills and the money and I think it's happening to me too." Over the next hour, Carol told me a story that was heartbreakingly familiar. Adult children who'd gradually taken control of her finances, medication that made her feel foggy and compliant, a growing sense that something was wrong but no one who believed her concerns. "What should I do?" she asked. I walked her through the steps I'd taken, documenting everything, finding trustworthy legal help, creating safe spaces for clear thinking. But more than practical advice, I gave her something no one had given me during my darkest moments: validation that her perceptions were accurate, that her concerns were reasonable, that she deserved better than what she was receiving. "You're not crazy," I told her, the same words I wished someone had said to me. "You're not imagining things, and you're not too old to save yourself." That phone call led to others. Word spread through the senior center network about the grandmother in Crown Heights who understood, who believed, who had fought back and won. My phone started ringing regularly with calls from older adults who needed someone to listen, to validate their experiences, to help them find resources. I wasn't a trained counselor or a legal expert, but I was something potentially more valuable, a survivor who could offer hope that escape was possible. I became an informal support network for elderly people who were facing what I'd faced, connecting them with lawyers, social workers, and support groups. Mrs. Rivera started helping me organize these calls, using her apartment as a secondary contact point for people who were afraid to call directly. We developed a system. She would take initial calls, assess the safety of the situation, and then connect the callers with me if they needed someone who truly understood their experience. "You've created something beautiful from something terrible," she observed one evening, as we reviewed a list of people I'd helped connect with resources over the past month. "You're turning your pain into other people's pathway to freedom." On my 75th birthday, I organized a different kind of celebration. Instead of a private party with friends, I hosted an elder rights awareness gathering at the community center. I invited everyone I'd met through my advocacy work: other survivors, social workers, lawyers who handled elder abuse cases, family members who wanted to understand how to support older adults without taking control of them. Amy helped me set up displays with information about recognizing elder abuse, resources for getting help, and stories from survivors who'd been willing to share their experiences. Mrs. Rivera made her famous tres leches cake, and Elena brought flowers from her garden. Standing in that room full of people who'd come together around the shared goal of protecting elderly people's dignity and autonomy, I felt something I'd never experienced before: the deep satisfaction of a life that had found its true purpose. "Speech! Speech!" someone called out, and gradually the room grew quiet. I looked around at the faces watching me. young social work students, middle-aged lawyers, fellow survivors, family members seeking to do better. This was my real family now, I realized. Not bound by blood or obligation, but by shared values and mutual respect. 3 years ago, I began. I was a woman who didn't trust her own mind, who couldn't access her own money, who had been convinced that her needs didn't matter. Today, I'm a woman who knows her worth, who speaks her truth, who helps other people find their voice when they thought they'd lost it forever. The applause was warm and sustained, but what meant the most to me were the individual faces I could see clearly. People nodding in recognition, wiping away tears, looking determined to carry this work forward. We're here because we believe that age doesn't diminish dignity, that family relationship doesn't justify abuse, and that it's never too late to choose yourself. We're here because we refuse to let our elders become invisible, disposable, or manageable. After the formal program ended, people lingered, sharing stories, exchanging contact information, making plans for future collaborations. I found myself in conversation with a young lawyer who specialized in elder law. "We need someone like you on our advisory board," she told me. "Someone who's lived this experience and can help us understand what our clients are really going through." It was an offer I would have been too intimidated to consider 3 years earlier. But the woman standing in that community center, surrounded by people who valued her voice and respected her experience, didn't hesitate. "I'd be honored," I said. Later that evening, after the last guest had left and Mrs. Rivera had helped me clean up, I sat alone in my apartment looking through the cards and letters people had left for me. Messages of gratitude from people who'd heard my story and found the courage to examine their own situations. Notes from family members who'd recognized problematic patterns in their relationships with older relatives. Contact information from people who wanted to join the informal network I'd accidentally created. One letter particularly caught my attention. It was from Sarah, delivered by hand sometime during the party. "Dear Margaret," it read, "I know I have no right to tell you how proud I am of what you've become, how inspired I am by your work, or how grateful I am that my children get to witness your strength. But I'm going to tell you anyway, because some truths are worth the risk of overstepping boundaries. You have turned your pain into purpose in a way that teaches all of us what real resilience looks like. You have refused to let what was done to you define what you could become. You have created light from darkness, hope from despair, power from powerlessness." Marcus and Jessica talk about their grandmother, the advocate, their grandmother, the public speaker, their grandmother who helps people. They're learning from you that age brings wisdom, not weakness. That boundaries create relationship instead of destroying it. That fighting for yourself is not selfish, it's necessary. I will never be able to undo the harm I contributed to, but I can spend the rest of my life making sure my children understand what I learned too late. That love without respect is not love at all. Thank you for showing us what strength looks like. Thank you for refusing to stay small to make us comfortable. Thank you for choosing yourself, even when it meant losing us. With deep respect and lasting gratitude, Sarah. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer, next to the notebook where I'd once tracked Daniel's unpaid loans. Proof of how far we'd all traveled from that terrible moment when I'd overheard those words that changed everything. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror, the same mirror where I'd first recognized the woman I'd become after waking up from years of medicated fog. My hair was whiter now, my lines deeper, but my eyes held something they'd been missing for too long. Peace. Not the peace of passive acceptance, but the peace of a woman who'd fought for her freedom and won. The peace of someone who'd learned the difference between being alone and being abandoned, between silence and emptiness, between surviving and thriving. Tomorrow, I would wake up and make my strong coffee and look out at my tree that bloomed faithfully every spring. I would answer calls from people who needed to know they weren't crazy, weren't imagining things, weren't too old to save themselves. I would paint watercolors of scenes that brought me joy, and visit with grandchildren who were learning that love requires respect, and have lunch with friends who valued my company for who I was, not what I could provide. It was a life I'd built myself, from the ashes of the life that had nearly destroyed me. A life that was entirely my own. And at 75, I was just getting started. If you're watching this, and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're being told you're too sensitive when you protest being mistreated, if you're having your judgment questioned when you raise valid concerns, if you're being managed instead of respected, please know that change is possible. Please know that your voice matters, your perceptions are valid, and your dignity is non-negotiable. Please know that it's never too late to choose yourself, to set boundaries, to demand the respect you deserve. Please know that you are not alone. Your story matters too. And if sharing mine helps even one person find the courage to save themselves, then every moment of pain was worth it. Every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, all of it was worth the person I became on the other side. Subscribe if this touched your heart. Share it with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone, that change is possible, that they deserve better. Together, we can create a world where age brings respect instead of vulnerability, where family means protection instead of exploitation, where love never requires the surrender of dignity. You are worth fighting for. You are worth saving. Even if you have to do the saving yourself, especially then.